Tonight, as you settle into the gentle rhythm of rest, imagine standing on a moonlit shore thousands of years ago. The silver light dances across waters that seem to breathe, rising and falling with a pulse as old as time itself. Above you, that ancient companion we call the moon hangs in perfect silence. Yet its invisible fingers reach down to caress every ocean, every sea, every tidal pool along the endless coastlines of our world. This is no ordinary relationship between celestial bodies. What you're witnessing is one of the most profound partnerships in our solar system, a cosmic dance that has shaped not just the contours of continents, but the very rise of human civilization itself. The moon pulls, and the oceans respond. The sun adds its voice to this gravitational chorus, and twice each day, the waters of Earth perform their eternal migration from shore to sea and back again. For most of us living in our modern world of concrete and glass, tides seem like distant poetry, something that happens to other people in other places. But step back in time, back to when humans lived intimately with natural rhythms, and you discover something remarkable. Those predictable pulses of water didn't just move the seas. They moved the course of human history. Ancient peoples noticed what we've forgotten in our rush toward progress. They saw that the ocean possessed a memory, a reliable heartbeat that could be trusted like no other force on Earth. While weather brought chaos and seasons brought uncertainty, tides brought something precious beyond measure. Predictability in an unpredictable world, the question that should keep us awake tonight, though it may well ease us into deeper contemplation, is this. How did something as simple as water moving in and out along shorelines become the hidden architect of the civilizations that built our world? The answer lies waiting in the moonlight, in the patient rhythm that has never missed a beat in billions of years. But to understand how tides shaped human destiny, we must first understand how the cosmos itself learned to breathe. Picture Earth suspended in the vast darkness of space, but not alone. Our planet dances with companions. The moon, that constant partner just 240,000 miles away, and the sun, that distant giant whose influence travels 93 million miles to reach us. Together, these three celestial bodies perform a gravitational ballet so precise that it makes Swiss clockwork seem clumsy by comparison. The moon, despite being smaller than our planet, wields influence far beyond its size. Its gravity reaches across the void to tug at everything on Earth, the land, the air, and most dramatically, the water. Imagine the ocean as a living thing with lungs, and the moon as the force that teaches it how to breathe. As our planet spins, different parts of its surface move closer to and farther from the moon, and the waters respond by rising and falling in what we've come to call high tide and low tide. But this isn't a simple story of one celestial body controlling another. The sun, massive beyond comprehension, adds its own gravitational voice to this cosmic conversation. When the sun and moon align, during what we call new moons and full moons, their combined pull creates the dramatic spring tides that can raise water levels far above normal. When they work at cross purposes during quarter moons, the gentler neap tides remind us that even in the cosmos, compromise exists. What makes this celestial choreography so remarkable is its reliability. For over 4 billion years, since Earth first gathered enough water to call itself an ocean planet, this rhythm has continued without pause. Ice ages have come and gone. Continents have drifted across the globe. Species have risen and fallen into extinction. But through it all, the tides have kept their appointment twice each day with mathematical precision. Ancient peoples, living without the distractions of modern life, became intimately familiar with this cosmic heartbeat. They had no scientific explanation for why the waters moved. The gravitational theory wouldn't be understood for thousands of years, but they didn't need scientific explanation to recognize the profound reliability of tidal patterns that a fisherman in ancient Britain could predict exactly when the waters would retreat to reveal the rich feeding grounds of the tidal flats. A farmer along the Nile could anticipate when tidal surges would push fertile river water further inland, enriching fields that had never seen direct rainfall. A trader in ancient Phoenicia could time departures from harbor to catch the tide that would carry ships safely over sandbars that became death traps at low water. They discovered that the ocean operated on a schedule more reliable than any human institution. Kingdoms might rise and fall, but the tide would always return at its appointed hour. Wars might rage and famines might devastate the land, but the gravitational conversation between Earth and Moon would continue its ancient dialogue without interruption. This reliability became the foundation upon which something extraordinary would be built. But first, these ancient peoples had to learn to read the language of abundance that tides wrote across their shorelines. Walk with me now along the edge of the ancient world, where land meets sea in that magical zone we call the intertidal. Here, twice each day, the retreating waters reveal a hidden landscape, a temporary world that exists between the realm of fish and the domain of land animals. This is nature's supermarket, and it comes with the cosmic guarantee that it will restock itself with clockwork precision when the tide pulls back its watery curtain. It exposes treasures that early humans quickly learned to treasure: oysters clinging to rocks like living coins, mussels clustering in purple-black colonies, crabs scuttling between tide pools, and fish trapped in temporary aquariums carved by retreating water. These weren't random gifts from the sea. They were reliable harvests that could be counted upon with the same certainty as sunrise and sunset. Imagine being an early human, perhaps 50,000 years ago, making your living from whatever the land provided. Hunting was dangerous and unpredictable. Gathering wild plants required extensive knowledge and often yielded meager results. But here, along the tidal margins, nature had created something unprecedented, a renewable resource that announced its availability with mathematical precision: the coastal peoples of ancient Europe. From Scotland's windswept shores to the Mediterranean's gentler beaches, built their entire seasonal calendars around tidal harvests. They learned that certain shellfish grew fat during specific moon phases, that particular seaweeds could be gathered only during the lowest tides of each month, that fish migrations coincided with tidal patterns in ways that seemed almost magical but proved utterly reliable. These tidal zones became more than just feeding grounds. They became universities, where humans learned lessons that would prove essential for building civilization. The concept of scheduled abundance, of resources that could be harvested according to predictable patterns rather than random luck, was revolutionary. For the first time in human history, people could plan beyond the immediate moment. Settlement patterns began to reflect this new relationship with predictability. Instead of following herds across vast territories or wandering in search of seasonal fruits, communities could establish permanent camps near productive tidal areas. These weren't yet cities, but they were the seeds from which cities would grow, places where humans could stay put long enough to develop complex technologies, social structures, and cultural traditions. Archaeological evidence from shell middens, ancient garbage dumps, filled with discarded oyster shells and crab claws, tells us that some coastal settlements continuously occupied the same locations for thousands of years. Generation after generation returned to the same tidal flats, refined their harvesting techniques, and passed down increasingly sophisticated knowledge about reading the ocean's moods and timing its gifts. The abundance wasn't just about food, though that was certainly crucial for communities that needed reliable nutrition to support larger populations. Tidal zones provided materials for tools, medicines from seaweeds and sea creatures, salt for food preservation, and even the first forms of portable wealth in the form of shells that could be traded with inland peoples who had never seen the ocean. But perhaps most importantly, tidal zones taught humans about cycles, patterns, and the profound connection between celestial movements and earthly abundance. They learned to read the moon not just as a source of light in the darkness, but as a cosmic calendar that governed the availability of resources they depended upon for survival. This education in natural rhythms would prove to be the foundation for something much larger than coastal settlements. Could this reliable tidal abundance be the hidden seed from which all civilization would eventually grow? The answer lies in what happened when humans discovered that rivers, too, could dance to the ocean's rhythm. The great rivers of human history, the Nile, the Euphrates, the Indus, the Thames, share a secret that textbooks often overlook. These waterways that nurtured the world's first great civilizations weren't just freshwater highways flowing from mountains to sea. They were tidal rivers, cosmic instruments played by the same gravitational forces that move the oceans, reaching far inland to deliver the moon's influence to communities that might never have seen salt water. Consider the Nile, that legendary lifeline of ancient Egypt. While most people know about the annual floods that deposited fertile silt across the river valley, fewer realize that tidal forces pushed Mediterranean waters up the river's mouth, creating a complex pattern of rising and falling water levels that extended more than 100 miles inland. This tidal influence didn't just affect water levels, it controlled the movement of nutrients, the timing of fish runs, and the accessibility of riverside landing sites that became the foundation of Egyptian river trade. Ancient Egyptian farmers developed agricultural techniques that worked with both seasonal floods and tidal rhythms. They learned to time the planting of certain crops to coincide with tidal cycles that brought fresh silt deposits to fields along the river's edge. Their irrigation systems weren't just designed to channel floodwater. They were engineered to capture and redirect tidal surges that pushed nutrient-rich water into carefully constructed field systems. The Mesopotamians, working with the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, took this tidal agriculture even further. These rivers, flowing into the Persian Gulf, experienced dramatic tidal ranges that could raise water levels by several feet twice each day. The Sumerians, Babylonians, and Assyrians built their entire civilization around predicting and harnessing these tidal pulses. Their cuneiform tablets record detailed observations of tidal patterns, linking them to lunar phases with an accuracy that wouldn't be matched by European science for thousands of years. They developed a complex system of canals and locks that could capture high tides and store the water for use during low tides, essentially creating the world's first tidal power storage systems. But the influence of tides on river civilizations went far beyond agriculture. These predictable water level changes created natural schedules for transportation and trade. Merchants learned to time their journeys to catch favorable tides that would carry heavy boats upstream against the current or provide extra depth for navigation over shallow areas that became impassable at low tide. The ancient city of Babylon wasn't just strategically located along the Euphrates, it was positioned at precisely the point where tidal influence reached its furthest inland extent. This location allowed Babylonian traders to take advantage of tidal assistance for river transport while remaining far enough from the coast to avoid the unpredictability of storms and foreign naval attacks. In Britain, the Thames carried Roman and later Anglo-Saxon civilizations deep into the heart of what would become England. London's location wasn't chosen randomly. It sits at the furthest point upstream that ocean-going vessels could reach during high tide, while remaining accessible to smaller riverboats at all tidal stages. The Romans used tidal timing to move heavy building materials upstream for construction projects, and medieval merchants built their trading schedules around the twice-daily tidal windows that made river commerce possible. The Indus Valley Civilization, one of history's most sophisticated ancient cultures, built their port cities with elaborate dock systems designed to accommodate dramatic tidal ranges. Harappa and Mohenjo-daro featured advanced water management technologies that modern engineers still admire, including tidal locks that allowed ships to enter and exit harbors regardless of tide level. These river civilizations learned to read water levels like a language, developing expertise that went far beyond simple observation. They created the world's first hydraulic engineering projects, not just to control floods or provide irrigation, but to work in partnership with tidal forces that could be predicted with astronomical precision. Yet with this mastery came a dangerous dependency. Communities that built their entire way of life around tidal predictability found themselves vulnerable when those patterns shifted or when human activities disrupted the delicate balance between river flow and tidal influence. The trust they placed in cosmic rhythms was well-founded, but it also made them prisoners of forces beyond their control. This tension between reliability and vulnerability would drive these civilizations to develop something that may be humanity's greatest invention: the measurement of time itself. Long before humans carved sundials or built water clocks, they had already discovered the most accurate timepiece on Earth: the rhythm of the tides themselves. In an age when the concept of precise time measurement seemed impossible, Ancient peoples found that the ocean provided a celestial chronometer more reliable than any mechanical device that would be invented for thousands of years to come, along the coasts of Neolithic Britain. Archaeological evidence reveals sophisticated fish traps built from precisely placed stones that could only function with intimate knowledge of tidal timing. These weren't simple barriers thrown across stream mouths. They were carefully engineered systems that required builders to predict not just when tides would arrive, but exactly how high they would rise and how quickly they would fall. The stone circles at these ancient fish traps show evidence of astronomical alignments, suggesting that their builders understood the connection between lunar phases and tidal strength. They knew that spring tides during full and new moons would fill their traps with different species of fish than the gentler neap tides of quarter moons. Each type of tide brought its own harvest, and the timing of that harvest could be predicted months in advance simply by watching the sky. Across the Pacific, Polynesian navigators developed tidal calendars of breathtaking sophistication. On islands where survival depended on reading the moods of the surrounding ocean, master navigators could predict tidal conditions weeks ahead of their voyages. They understood that the same gravitational forces creating tides also influenced ocean currents, wave patterns, and even the behavior of marine life they encountered during their incredible journeys across thousands of miles of open water. These Polynesian timekeepers didn't use written records. Their calendars lived in chanted verses, passed down through generations of navigators. Each chant encoded precise information about tidal timing, seasonal variations, and the complex interactions between lunar cycles and local geography that made accurate navigation possible across the vast Pacific. The precision of their tidal knowledge allowed Polynesian cultures to schedule everything from fishing expeditions to religious ceremonies according to oceanic rhythms. They understood that certain fish could only be caught during specific tidal conditions. That particular types of seaweed needed precise tidal exposure to maintain their nutritional value, and that ocean voyages had optimal departure windows that occurred only a few times each month. In ancient China, tidal observations along major rivers became the foundation for the world's first systematic approach to hydraulic engineering. Chinese engineers developed water clocks that were calibrated using tidal measurements, creating timepieces that remained accurate across seasons and years. They discovered that by combining observations of river tides with astronomical calculations, they could predict everything from optimal planting dates to the best times for launching military campaigns that depended on river transport. Medieval European monasteries built their daily schedules around tidal timing, particularly in coastal communities where the brothers depended on tidal flats for food and tidal mills for grain processing. The canonical hours of prayer were often adjusted to accommodate tidal schedules that determined when essential community work could be performed. These monastic communities developed some of history's most detailed tidal records, documenting patterns with scientific precision centuries before the development of formal oceanography. Their manuscripts reveal that medieval monks understood complex tidal phenomena like harmonic interactions between multiple tidal cycles, seasonal variations in tidal range, and the effects of weather patterns on tidal timing. The accuracy of ancient tidal timekeeping was remarkable. Polynesian navigators could predict tidal conditions with precision that modern tide tables struggle to match. Chinese hydraulic engineers scheduled massive construction projects around tidal patterns predicted months in advance. British fish trap builders created systems that functioned automatically according to tidal schedules that never varied by more than a few minutes across entire seasons. But perhaps most importantly, these early chronometers taught humans about the concept of structured time itself. Before tidal timekeeping, human activities were governed by immediate needs: hunger, fatigue, darkness, weather. Tides introduced the revolutionary concept that time could be divided into predictable segments, that future events could be anticipated and planned for, and that human activities could be synchronized with cosmic rhythms larger than individual need or desire. This was the birth of scheduled civilization, the idea that communities could coordinate complex activities by agreeing to follow the same celestial timetable. And from this coordination would emerge something that ancient peoples experienced as nothing less than divine. The recognition that the forces moving their daily lives were connected to powers that moved the very heavens. When ancient peoples looked out at waters that rose and fell with celestial precision, they witnessed something that challenged every assumption about the natural world. Here was a force that operated according to rules more reliable than any earthly authority, that responded to invisible powers moving through the sky, that could be predicted but never controlled. It's no wonder that tides became woven into the very fabric of religious belief, transforming the simple movement of water into evidence of divine presence in the world. The Mesopotamians, watching the Tigris and Euphrates respond to gravitational forces they couldn't understand, developed elaborate mythologies around water gods whose breathing caused the rivers to rise and fall. Marduk, their supreme deity, was said to control the cosmic waters through his eternal struggle with Tiamat, the primordial ocean goddess. Every tide was seen as a pulse in this divine conflict, and Babylonian priests learned to read tidal patterns as messages from the gods about everything from agricultural planning to military strategy. Their ziggurats, those stepped temple towers that dominated Mesopotamian cities, weren't just religious monuments. They were astronomical observatories designed specifically to track the relationships between lunar phases and tidal patterns. Priest astronomers climbed these ancient skyscrapers nightly to record celestial observations that would be combined with tidal measurements to create religious calendars that governed the entire civilization. The Greeks, with their philosophical approach to understanding natural phenomena, saw tides as evidence of cosmic harmony. Poseidon, their god of earthquakes and the sea, was believed to use tides as a way of communicating with mortals about the proper rhythm of life. Greek coastal cities built their temples according to tidal orientations, with sacred spaces designed to flood during spring. Tides as part of purification rituals that connected worshippers directly with divine forces. Greek philosophers like Pythagoras studied tidal patterns as evidence for their theories about cosmic mathematics. They believed that the same numerical relationships that created musical harmony also govern the movement of celestial bodies and, through them, the rhythm of tides. This led to the development of sacred music designed to mirror tidal cycles, with compositions that rose and fell in patterns matching the ocean's gravitational dance. The Polynesians developed perhaps the most sophisticated tidal mythology of any ancient culture. Their navigation traditions were deeply spiritual, treating the ocean not as empty space between islands, but as a living entity whose moods and rhythms could be read by those properly initiated into its mysteries. Tidal patterns weren't just practical navigation aids, they were the breathing of ocean spirits who could either guide voyagers safely to their destinations or lead them astray if proper rituals weren't observed. Polynesian navigators underwent years of training that combined practical seamanship with spiritual disciplines designed to attune their consciousness to oceanic rhythms. Master navigators were believed to possess supernatural abilities to sense tidal changes and current patterns across vast distances, skills that were as much mystical as they were practical. In Celtic Britain, tidal pools became sacred spaces where druids performed rituals timed to coincide with specific tidal conditions. They believed that the retreating tide carried away spiritual impurities, while the returning tide brought renewal and healing power from the mysterious realms beyond the horizon. Stone circles along Celtic coasts were often positioned to frame views of tidal flats that would be revealed only during the lowest tides of each lunar month. The Celts developed elaborate seasonal ceremonies that combined astronomical observations with tidal timing. Their festivals weren't just celebrations of solar events like solstices and equinoxes. They were complex rituals that honored the interplay between sun, moon, and sea that created the tidal patterns essential to their coastal way of life. Even the Romans, with their practical approach to engineering and governance, treated tides as manifestations of divine will that required proper religious observance. Roman ports included temples dedicated to Neptune where merchants would make offerings before departing on voyages timed to coincide with favorable tides. The success of Roman naval operations was attributed as much to proper religious ritual as to military strategy and seamanship. Roman engineers, while developing sophisticated technologies for harbor construction and coastal defense, maintained that their projects would only succeed if they worked in harmony with divine forces manifested through tidal action. They consulted augurs who specialized in reading omens from tidal patterns, and major construction projects were scheduled according to religious calendars that incorporated both astronomical and tidal observations. This fusion of practical knowledge with spiritual reverence created civilizations that lived in conscious partnership with cosmic forces. Ancient peoples didn't just use tides, they participated in tidal rhythms as part of a larger spiritual discipline that connected human activity with celestial movements. But what happened when these carefully cultivated relationships between human communities and divine tidal forces encountered the unpredictable violence of storms, floods, and other natural disasters? The answer would determine which civilizations would endure and which would be swept away by the very forces they had learned to worship. The relationship between human settlements and tidal forces was never simply one of harmony and abundance. For every civilization that learned to thrive in partnership with oceanic rhythms, there were others that discovered, too late, that the same forces capable of delivering reliable prosperity could also unleash destruction beyond human comprehension or control. Venice offers perhaps the most dramatic example of a civilization that both triumphed and suffered through its intimate relationship with tides. Built deliberately in a lagoon where tidal action provided natural defense against land-based invaders, Venice engineered one of history's most sophisticated urban relationships with water. The city's founders understood that twice-daily tides would flush waste from their canals, provide access routes that could be controlled by those who understood tidal timing, and create a form of natural fortification that made conventional military siege nearly impossible. For over 1,000 years, Venice used tidal knowledge as a source of political and economic power. Venetian merchants could navigate shallow lagoon waters that trapped enemy vessels, time their departures to catch favorable tides that would carry them quickly to open sea, and return home through channels that only local pilots could safely navigate during specific tidal conditions. But Venice also lived under constant threat from the same forces that provided its advantages. Storm surges, when combined with spring tides, could raise water levels far above normal, flooding the city's squares and buildings in ways that no amount of engineering could prevent. The Venetians learned to read weather patterns with almost supernatural accuracy, evacuating low-lying areas before combinations of storm and tide could create disasters that might destroy centuries of accumulated wealth in a single night. The Bay of Fundy, with the highest tides on Earth, created both opportunities and challenges for the Akkadian peoples who settled along its shores. These dramatic tides, rising and falling by as much as 50 feet twice each day, created vast expanses of fertile mudflats that could be farmed during low tide and provided rich fishing grounds during high tide. The Akkadians developed agricultural techniques found nowhere else on Earth, building dikes and drainage systems that could capture and channel tidal energy for land reclamation projects. They learned to farm the ocean floor itself, planting crops in soil that was alternately exposed to air and covered by seawater according to predictable tidal schedules. Yet the same extreme tidal ranges that made their agricultural innovations possible also created constant danger. Miscalculating tidal timing could trap farmers on mudflats as waters rose around them faster than a person could run. Ships that ventured too far into tidal rivers during high tide might find themselves stranded on dry land when the waters receded, sometimes miles from navigable water. The ancient Minoans, ruling their Mediterranean empire from the island of Crete, built their naval supremacy around precise understanding of tidal patterns throughout their trading network. Minoan ships could navigate shallow harbors that were impassable to vessels operated by crews without detailed tidal knowledge, giving them commercial advantages that helped build one of history's first maritime trading empires. But Minoan civilization also demonstrates how quickly tidal mastery could become tidal vulnerability. When the volcanic island of Thera exploded around 1600 BCE, it generated tsunami waves that overwhelmed Minoan coastal cities despite their sophisticated understanding of normal tidal patterns. The same low-lying harbors and coastal palaces that had been designed to work with predictable tides became death traps when confronted with waves that followed no celestial schedule. The Maya, building cities along the Caribbean and Gulf coasts of Mexico, developed complex relationships with tidal lagoons and coastal wetlands that provided both resources and challenges. Mayan engineers constructed elaborate canal systems that used tidal energy for transportation and agriculture, moving massive stone blocks for temple construction by timing their transport to coincide with high tides that could float heavy loads through otherwise impassable swamps. Mayan astronomers, among the most sophisticated in the ancient world, developed calendars that tracked not just solar and lunar cycles, but also the complex tidal patterns that governed coastal agriculture and transportation. Their understanding of tidal timing was so precise that they could predict optimal conditions for everything from salt production to long-distance trading expeditions months in advance. Yet, even Mayan technological and astronomical sophistication couldn't always protect against tidal disasters. Hurricane-driven storm surges could overwhelm their coastal cities, and extended droughts could disrupt the river flows that interacted with tidal patterns to create the conditions Mayan agriculture depended upon. These civilizations learned that mastery of tidal forces required constant vigilance and continuous adaptation. Success came to those who remained humble before cosmic forces larger than human ambition, who built flexibility into their systems, and who never forgot that the same powers that enabled their prosperity could also humble their greatest achievements. The lesson written in flooded palaces and abandoned harbors across the ancient world was clear. Tides were both gift and threat, opportunity and danger, the foundation of civilization and the force that could sweep civilizations away. Those who learned to live with this paradox thrived. Those who forgot it disappeared beneath the waves. But for those civilizations that successfully navigated the balance between tidal opportunity and tidal risk, something remarkable awaited. The discovery that oceanic rhythms could become tools of empire, weapons of war, and pathways to worlds beyond the horizon. The true genius of ancient maritime civilizations lay not just in their ability to work with tides, but in their recognition that tidal knowledge could be transformed into strategic power capable of determining the fate of nations. The invisible rhythm of gravitational forces became a secret weapon that separated dominant empires from those destined to remain landlocked and limited. The Phoenicians, those master traders of the ancient Mediterranean, built their commercial empire on superior knowledge of tidal timing throughout their vast trading network, while other merchants struggled with unpredictable departures and dangerous arrivals. Phoenician captains could calculate precise departure times that would deliver their ships to distant harbors exactly at high tide, when safe passage over sandbars and coral reefs was guaranteed. This tidal mastery wasn't just convenient. It was economically revolutionary. Phoenician ships could access markets that remained closed to competitors who lacked detailed tidal knowledge. They could time their arrivals to coincide with local market days that were themselves scheduled according to tidal patterns, maximizing profits while minimizing the time spent waiting in port. More importantly, Phoenician navigators developed the first systematic approach to recording and sharing tidal information across their trading empire. They created networks of harbor pilots who maintained detailed records of local tidal patterns, seasonal variations, and the complex interactions between different bodies of water that determined safe navigation routes. This information became a form of intellectual property more valuable than gold or silver. Phoenician merchants could venture into waters that remained dangerous mysteries to their competitors, establishing trading relationships with distant peoples who had never seen foreign ships arrive with such confident precision. The Vikings took tidal warfare to an entirely different level. Their shallow draft longships were specifically designed to take advantage of tidal cycles in ways that left their enemies completely vulnerable. Viking raiders could approach coastal targets during high tide, using tidal rivers and temporary channels that were impassable to deeper draft vessels, then disappeared during low tide through escape routes that pursuing ships couldn't follow. The psychological impact of this tidal stealth was devastating to coastal communities throughout medieval Europe. Viking attacks seemed to come from nowhere, striking without warning through waterways that appeared too shallow for navigation, then vanishing as mysteriously as they had appeared. Viking navigators possessed tidal knowledge that encompassed the entire North Atlantic. They could predict safe passage through treacherous waters around Iceland and Greenland by calculating how tidal patterns interacted with seasonal ice flows. This expertise enabled Viking exploration and settlement of territories that remained impossible for other European sailors to reach for centuries. The Chinese, with their massive treasure fleets of the early 15th century, demonstrated how tidal knowledge could project imperial power across vast oceanic distances. Admiral Zheng He's expeditions, involving fleets of hundreds of ships carrying tens of thousands of crew members, required logistical coordination that would challenge modern naval operations. Chinese naval engineers developed sophisticated techniques for managing fleet movements according to tidal schedules that varied dramatically across their routes from the South China Sea to the Indian Ocean and beyond. They learned to use monsoon patterns in combination with tidal cycles to achieve sailing schedules that minimize travel time while maximizing safety for their enormous vessels. The precision of Chinese tidal calculations enabled these treasure fleets to arrive at distant ports with timing that seemed magical to local populations. Chinese admirals could promise arrival dates months in advance and keep those promises with accuracy that demonstrated technological sophistication far beyond anything their hosts had experienced. The British Royal Navy's eventual dominance of global sea routes was built upon centuries of accumulated tidal knowledge that began with detailed observations of British coastal waters and expanded to encompass every navigable body of water on Earth. British naval supremacy wasn't just about superior ship design or naval tactics, it was about information superiority regarding the oceanic conditions that determined where ships could go and when they could get there. British naval charts became the global standard not because they were more beautiful or more detailed than others, but because they included tidal information accurate enough to enable safe navigation by crews who had never visited particular waters before. This standardization of tidal knowledge gave British merchants and naval forces unprecedented access to global markets and strategic positions. The British Admiralty's tide tables, first published in the 18th century, represented one of history's most successful information monopolies. Other nations could copy British ship designs and naval tactics, but reproducing decades of carefully accumulated tidal observations required time and resources that few governments could invest. Even in warfare, tidal knowledge provided strategic advantages that could determine the outcomes of entire campaigns. The D-Day landings in Normandy required calculations of tidal conditions so precise that the invasion had to be postponed when weather patterns threatened to disrupt tidal predictions that had been planned for months in advance. Throughout human history, those who understood the ocean's rhythm held keys to power that extended far beyond their immediate coastlines. Tidal knowledge became a form of technological superiority that enabled some civilizations to project influence across vast distances while others remained confined to their local territories. But as we enter our modern era, the question becomes, how do these ancient lessons about tidal power apply to civilizations armed with technologies our ancestors could never have imagined? Stand tonight on any contemporary shoreline, perhaps along the coast of Maine, where tidal power plants now harvest energy from the same gravitational forces that once powered medieval mills, or in the Netherlands where massive storms surge. Barriers protect millions of people using engineering principles that would amaze ancient Venetian hydraulic masters, and you witness humanity's continuing dance with the cosmic rhythm that shaped our earliest civilizations. The relationship hasn't ended. It has evolved into something both more sophisticated and more urgent than anything our ancestors experienced. Modern tidal power installations, like the Siwa Lake Station in South Korea or the experimental arrays being tested in the Bay of Fundy, represent humanity's attempt to harness tidal energy on industrial scales that could provide clean electricity for millions of people. These aren't just engineering marvels, they're the latest chapter in humanity's ancient relationship with oceanic forces. The same gravitational dialogue between Earth, Moon, and sun that taught our ancestors about reliable natural rhythms now offers solutions to climate change challenges that threaten the stability of modern civilization. But our modern tidal relationship involves complexities that ancient peoples never had to consider. Rising sea levels, driven by climate change, are altering tidal patterns in ways that disrupt systems developed over centuries of careful observation. Coastal cities from Miami to Venice face tidal flooding that exceeds the parameters their infrastructure was designed to handle. The storm surge barriers protecting London, the seawalls defending San Francisco Bay, and the flood control systems safeguarding coastal communities throughout America represent massive investments in technologies designed to work with tidal forces rather than against them. These projects draw upon engineering principles developed over thousands of years, combining ancient wisdom about oceanic behavior with modern materials and construction techniques. Yet even our most advanced coastal defenses acknowledge that we remain, fundamentally, a tidal civilization. Our major ports still schedule operations according to tidal calendars. Container ships arriving at Los Angeles or New York still time their movements to catch favorable tides that provide the extra depth needed for safe navigation into harbor. Commercial fishing operations, now equipped with satellite navigation and electronic fish finders, still depend on tidal timing that determines when and where marine species will be available for harvest. The same principles that guided Neolithic fish trap builders continue to influence billion-dollar fishing industries that feed much of the world's population. Modern urban planning increasingly recognizes that sustainable coastal development requires designing with tidal cycles rather than attempting to eliminate their influence. Cities like Copenhagen and Amsterdam are pioneering approaches to urban design that accommodate periodic flooding as a natural part of their operational cycle, creating spaces that serve different functions during high and low tides. The global shipping industry, moving over 90% of international trade, operates according to tidal schedules coordinated across every major port on Earth. Modern logistics networks use computer systems to optimize shipping routes based on tidal predictions that extend months into the future, achieving efficiencies that ancient merchants could only dream of while following the same basic principles they discovered thousands of years ago. Even our financial markets reflect tidal influences, as commodity prices for everything from seafood to shipping services fluctuate according to oceanic conditions that ultimately trace back to gravitational forces moving through space at the speed of celestial mechanics. Climate change research increasingly focuses on how shifting tidal patterns might affect everything from coastal erosion to marine ecosystem health. Scientists studying sea level rise must account for complex interactions between changing ocean volumes and tidal forces that will determine which coastal regions remain habitable and which become uninhabitable over the coming decades. The ancient recognition that human civilization exists in dynamic relationship with cosmic forces has become central to discussions about sustainable development, renewable energy, and climate adaptation strategies that will determine the future of human society on a planet where oceanic conditions continue to change. We remain, whether we acknowledge it or not, descendants of civilizations that learned to read the language of tides. Our technologies have evolved, but our fundamental dependence on oceanic rhythms continues to shape everything from where we build our cities to how we schedule the global transportation networks that hold modern civilization together. The question that emerges from this continuity is both ancient and urgently contemporary. As tidal patterns shift in response to climate change, how will our future civilizations adapt to oceanic rhythms that may no longer follow the predictable patterns our ancestors learned to trust? As we drift back toward the moonlit shore where our journey began, carried by the same gravitational currents that have moved human history for thousands of years, we find ourselves contemplating a legacy that stretches from the first human who noticed that the ocean kept a cosmic schedule to the modern engineers designing tidal power systems that may help save our climate-threatened world. The moon still hangs in the night sky, still pulling at our oceans with the same patient force that taught our ancestors about predictability in an uncertain world. The tides still rise and fall twice each day, maintaining their appointment with mathematical precision that has never varied throughout all the centuries of human civilization. What has changed is our understanding of how profoundly this celestial rhythm has shaped everything we call human progress. The concept of scheduled time, the development of permanent settlements, the rise of agriculture and trade, the emergence of navigation and exploration, the growth of cities and empires. All of these foundations of civilization trace their origins to lessons learned from the twice-daily breathing of the sea. The shells and bones found in ancient middens tell us that our ancestors gathered seafood according to tidal schedules over 50,000 years ago. The stone fish traps of Neolithic Britain demonstrate sophisticated understanding of tidal engineering over 6,000 years ago. The astronomical observations recorded on Babylonian tablets show detailed knowledge of relationships between lunar phases and tidal patterns over 4,000 years ago. This isn't just archaeological curiosity. It's evidence of humanity's longest continuous relationship with natural forces beyond our control. While empires have risen and fallen, while technologies have been invented and forgotten, while entire civilizations have vanished from human memory, the tidal rhythm has continued without interruption, offering the same lessons about cosmic reliability and natural partnership that it offered to our earliest ancestors. Modern climate science tells us that rising sea levels will transform coastlines around the world over the coming centuries. The same forces that enabled the rise of tidal civilizations may challenge the survival of contemporary coastal cities that house over half of humanity's current population. Yet the story of how tides created ancient civilizations suggests that this challenge, like so many before it, may also contain opportunities for those wise enough to read the ocean's changing language. Rising seas will create new tidal zones, new opportunities for tidal energy generation, new possibilities for sustainable coastal development designed to work with oceanic forces rather than against them. The Polynesian navigators who read wave patterns reflected off distant islands, the Roman engineers who built harbor systems that still function after 2,000 years, the Chinese admirals who coordinated massive fleets according to tidal schedules. All of these examples remind us that human ingenuity reaches its highest expression when it works in partnership with natural forces rather than attempting to dominate them. Tonight, as you listen to the eternal conversation between moon and ocean, between gravitational force and moving water, you're hearing the same cosmic dialogue that shaped every human civilization that has ever existed. The rhythm that rocks you toward sleep is the rhythm that taught humanity about time, about planning, about the possibility of creating lasting settlements in harmony with forces larger than individual human will. The tides that created ancient civilizations continue their patient work tonight, carrying away the debris of failed attempts to ignore natural limits, bringing in the materials from which tomorrow's sustainable communities might be built. Whether we learn again to read their language and partner with their power, or whether we continue to treat them as obstacles to human ambition, will determine what kinds of civilizations rise from the shores of our changing world. The moon still pulls, the waters still respond, and somewhere on tonight's tide, the seeds of future civilizations drift toward shores that await discovery by those wise enough to recognize that human destiny has always been written in the rhythm of the waves.